Our kids are not okay. Parents, we need to stop and realize that we got to do something different. 40% of kids are dealing with some sort of chronic illness, neurodevelopmental challenges like autism, ADHD, and learning disabilities, or other chronic immune struggles, right? Allergies, eczema, skin flare-ups. There's so many issues that our kids are getting wrecked with, and it's not okay. And we need to think about these differently. Otherwise, we're going to still continue on this path that we're on, right? Because things aren't getting better. If you look at the rates of these challenges, they're skyrocketing. They're worsening every single year. So unless we completely shift our paradigm of health, our philosophy of what health looks like, it's only going to keep getting worse. And instead of 40%, we're going to wake up in a couple years and it's going to be 50%. It's going to be 60%. It's going to be the majority of our kids are dealing with some sort of issue. We're not okay with that. I know you're not either. So what do we got to do? I was just talking to a parent the other day who happens to be a teacher, and he was reflecting on, less than 20 years of being in the classroom. And we've seen this shift from maybe a kid, one or two kids in the classroom that had an IEP or had a 504 plan, needed some sort of help, to now it's almost the majority of them, right? We've seen this major shift, and the typical explanations aren't really cutting it as to what's going on. So that's what this video is for. I want to talk about how are we missing the mark, where are we completely off base, and how that traditional model would explain these issues, and what do we need to do instead? What is our approach, and how would I guess argue that it makes a lot more sense to come at it from that angle. So let's start with just the ways that traditional healthcare model is missing the mark. I think of it in three different ways. The first two are probably going to be obvious. That third one, though, you might look at it as a good approach, but I still think is incomplete. So these first two, the ways that typical system is really focused, that I think is incomplete. Simplify by just saying genetics and germs, right? The genetics piece of it, that's really what is given as the explanation as to why we see specifically some of the neurodevelopmental challenges just skyrocketing. And it looks at health as really just a byproduct of your genes, right? You either get lucky or you don't. You have good genes or you have bad genes. And it's just, you don't get to play any role in that actual outcome. I really don't like that approach from multiple levels. One, it completely disempowers your agency, right? Your ability to influence your health, which obviously we all know is the biggest factor in your overall wellness or lack of health. It's your own health choices. But also, it's just not true, right? Because the way that we've seen these disorders skyrocketed over the last 10 to 50 years, genes don't change in that time frame, right? They change over millennia in a much broader time horizon. So that doesn't make sense. We can't look at that as the reason why we have so many more issues and struggles. So we don't want to look at it in that sense because it really disempowers you, and it's just not true, right? It doesn't hold water. It doesn't truly explain why we see kids struggling so much. So genetics is one piece of it, germs is the other, right? The germ theory. You get sick because you're around an invader. You're around a bacteria or a virus that then sets up shop and then creates whatever the symptoms are. Sure, there is an aspect of that is true, but the biggest factor in health or lack of health isn't the invader that you come across, isn't the fact that you are exposed to some sort of germ, it's how well your body is fighting it off, right? I'm sure you've had this experience, or you've heard other parents talk about like, oh, they bring home stuff from daycare, or when the school year starts, they bring all the illnesses home and everybody's sick. Yeah, they have more chances to be exposed to stuff, but what we need to do and what we need to think about if we're going to be dealing with those struggles and get stuck in a rut of illnesses is how do we increase our body's ability to fight it, right? Because that is what the biggest factor in health or sickness is how well can your internal defenses, how well can your immune system fight against that invader. It's not just being exposed to it that creates the illness, it's a lack of fighting it off. So germs and genetics aren't really a complete story of what's happening. We've had this shift in recent years, and this even taking place on a broader scale, even politically, of a focus on toxic health and toxic and chemical exposure. That's the third way that is getting closer, but is still missing the mark. And I think that the missing piece with this one is that parents are looking at just the increase in toxic load that our kids are under as the reason for these health struggles. Absolutely don't love it, right? You'll hear us use the phrase, kids and chemicals do not mix. I want to live, and we try to live as a family as chemical toxin free as possible. We don't want our kids eating artificial colors and flavors. We don't want them consuming different dyes and artificial crap that should not even be in our food, let alone be regularly consumed by kids. That is important. I want you to help avoid that, but it's still not explaining the whole thing. It's not just the recent exposure that's increased. there's more to it. Because if you think back, like we look at today as how toxic and crappy our food and our environment is, as how the worst it's been, but not that long ago, you were still smoking in restaurants, right? Parents or doctors were even recommending certain brands of cigarettes, and it was commonplace. Pregnant moms were smoking in pregnancy. There's way more pesticides that have been outlawed at this point, right? DDT was being used regularly 50 years ago. So as much as we look at today as the worst that's been, it's been there for a while, right? That's been around 50, 60, 100 years. So part of the story, but I think there's a missing piece still. And really the missing piece that is not just the extra toxic load that kids are under, but that is happening to kids who are less able to adapt to it. And that is where the word stress comes in, right? That is the summary of what I would call the perfect storm of why we see so many kids struggling. Yes, there's more negative toxic factors, but it's those things are happening to kids who have a stressed out nervous system. When your neurology is stuck in a fight or flight survival mode state, you can't handle that extra toxic load, right? Things that maybe would have been okay, right? Things that would have been able to be handled or processed 50 years ago, 20 years ago, all of a sudden is pushing kids over the edge. And that's where you'll hear phrases from maybe the grandparents or the parents in your life of like, oh, well, back in my day, or you always ate like that, or it didn't bother you. Well, one, that's not really a good way of looking at things, right? Just because you got away with something doesn't mean it's helpful. But also, you were probably under a different amount of stress. There's a few factors that go into that, but the one that isn't talked about enough is early life stressors. And that can sometimes look like maternal stress in pregnancy, right? We are doing a terrible job of supporting and empowering moms in that pregnancy journey. So they're going through that in a fearful survival mode state, which then sets up baby's neurology to follow suit. We also have in utero constraint, physical trauma at birth process from C-section, forceps, vacuum extraction, right? C-section rates are up to 35, 40%. That is astronomical and is massively affecting our kids' ability to adapt. There's so much more we could get into with that, but just in a nutshell, the missing piece that so many people are unaware of, maybe in your own research as a parent, you've come across this term or this nerve of the vagus nerve, super important nerve, comes out of the base of your skull, runs right by those first couple cervical vertebrae. You'll see it on our fuse box posted here right up top. That vagus nerve is your digestion, is your immune system, is your emotional regulation. All of those really, really important wellness functions in that area is the most vulnerable and is the most likely to be negatively impacted, to be damaged in that birth process. So when you yank your baby out by their head and neck, or when you have that in utero constraint, that force, that extra stress, it really, really damages that important upper neck area. And then what we're missing is that is going to affect way more than you realize, right? The nervous system controls everything. If you could zoom in on my poster here, you would realize you'd see stuff like colic and reflux, ear infections, sleep, anxiety, ADHD, focus. So many challenges are going to be related to different areas in the nervous system, but especially that upper regulation region. That's the air traffic control center of everything else. So if we have that blown fuse, or if we have that stress there, it's going to have a wide-ranging impact. So the neurology is everything. We can't just assume that kids will grow out of those early life challenges, because we see it so frequently grow into the next version of them, right? I hate that phrase, they'll grow out of it, right? If you've got a baby that's struggling, don't just sit and hope that they eventually get through it. Take action to help address the cause. Unless you actually address the underlying mechanism, the root cause of why the kid is dealing with those early life challenges, it's just going to manifest differently as they grow up, right? Because a baby's life is pretty simple. You're just eating and sleeping and pooping. But as you get older, you have more demands, motor-wise. You have more demands with communication, emotional regulation, cognition, and focus. All of a sudden, those same stresses that mess with your gut health and your ability to latch and poop and have just a normal, happy baby life are showing up in speech delays, focus and emotional regulations and tantrums, and way more serious issues. Those problems didn't just start at 3 or 5 or whenever it hit the fan for your kiddo. It's been brooding beneath the surface probably from day one, if that was your kid's start to life. So we need to look at this differently. We need to start thinking about nervous system regulation instead of just symptom whack-a-mole, right? Because you can see a million different symptoms on that right-hand column here. But if we constantly chase those symptoms and just look at health as the absence of disease, you're never really getting to that functional piece a layer deeper, right? You're never really getting to the why behind those issues. So that is 100% our goal as neurologically focused chiropractors, is address the cause. It's address that nervous system regulation. And a lot of times the secondary things the symptoms really take care of themselves, right? Maybe there is a gut immune motor detox sort of pathway that you got addressed after that, right? That's why we love our PTs and our functional medicine providers. They serve a huge role, but we've got to address that foundation first, right? Development happens neurologically first, and then layers on top of it. That's how healing happens too. So parents, I hope that helps. And I hope that the summary message I want you to hear right now is what this shirt says. It's probably my favorite phrase, my favorite slogan within chiropractic. It's the audio principle: above, down, inside out. I want you to think about health from an inside out perspective, not an outside in. The best way that we make our kids healthy isn't putting the right lotions and potions and medications into their body. It's by just optimizing that internal defenses, that's supporting neurology, supporting the amazing innate intelligence they have, because that is so much smarter than anything else we've come up with since then. So start focusing on that, right? Look at things that help increase your kids' health, increase their overall wellness. Don't look at it as like, oh, I'm gonna take this or I'm gonna do this activity to treat a specific symptom or challenge they're dealing with. The more you layer in and the more you add stuff to their wellness routine that just improves overall well-being, the better your end result's gonna be. And that's 100% what we are here for. So I hope that helps, parents. Reach out if you got any thoughts or questions, and can't wait to see you in the office soon.